So one of the things we're going to talk about today is your trip to South Africa,
Yes.
because it was full of incident. And so what I'd like you to do is just tell us what happened, because people that know you know it wasn't the most enjoyable experience, but might not know all the details. So we don't want all the gory details, but it'd be nice to have some.
Well, the trip to South Africa itself was a retirement present to me. Mum had just died, and I had retired because of that just beforehand. And we decided that we would take the trip of a lifetime. Ian has family out there, so we flew out to Cape Town and travelled all around that area, up to Durban, Port Elizabeth, St Lucia. Did safaris on land, we did safaris on sea. I've got some amazing photographs. So we were walking with elephants, and we had one or two incidents with elephants that, in actual fact, when I think about what happened to me in the end, I could well have been finished long before then with some of the things that happened. We had one that was guarding his baby and came towards us, and he was side on to the... I was in the front. I'd had a slight accident before I went out there, actually.
Well, that's a surprise.
In the club. I'd fallen over and I'd hurt my ankle, something like that. I wasn't walking properly, so they sat me in the front of the Land Rover all holiday. I got the front seat.
Yeah, that's handy, wasn't it?
Yes. Anyway, this elephant was, it started walking towards us, and it sort of came around the side, and they bring their ears forward when they're like, and it started coming, and I was leaning into the driver behind me. He was making noises at the elephant, and he did actually in the end calm the elephant down. The drivers, they know how to calm animals that are distressed and things like that. One of the things they did, they were teaching us about elephant dung, and they were saying that elephant dung, if you actually burn it, clears the nostrils. And I was suffering quite badly from rhinitis. And so he actually collected me some elephant dung to take back to the camp with me. And we sort of went on through the day, and we had, we'd seen quite a bit. Got back to the camp, had dinner, and there's this big campfire there, and Ian and I sat around the campfire to get out the elephant dung. And yes, we did actually light the elephant dung, and I did inhale the elephant dung.
Oh, goodness.
Last thing at night before we were about to go to bed. And it does clear the nostrils. The accommodation was up quite a few steps, quite high up, and I suspect I know why what happened actually happened.
Is it alcohol induced?
No, nothing to do with me. That morning we had been at breakfast, and we'd been looking at our hut across the lake, and a very large stag of some kind had walked up we actually only saw it at the bottom of the steps to our accommodation, but when we got home that day, there was a rather large something that it had left on the veranda outside
lovely.
The front door. So having got rid of that, we laughed, and I sort of said, that's too big for a monkey. And I said, I reckon it was that stag that was there first thing this morning, and it must have walked up the banisters. And I'm thinking how big it was. I'm wondering whether it actually loosened the banister at the top.
Yeah.
So, because it also would have had to have turned around and come down again. It was the very top banister which came away. Anyway, I was up there, we were just about to settle down, and I said to Ian, I was looking at the lights over the actual camp itself, and I said, I'm just going to go and take some photographs. I took one or two outwards of the camp, and then I said to him, I'm going now down to the bottom, and I'm going to take some back up again. So I went and put my hand on the banister, and the next thing I knew, the whole thing had toppled and taken me with it. About 8 feet below. The floor was as hard as concrete because the actual accommodations itself was built on great big poles which were into the ground.
Yeah.
So I knew I'd done something drastic to my wrist. He covered me over with a blanket and went to find somebody, and he kept coming back saying, I can't get hold of anybody. He got out to where the Land Rovers are, and he started beeping the horns on the Land Rovers in the hope that somebody would just hear, and eventually somebody did. But it was over an hour. They came immediately, managed to get the ambulance, and they took me to the public hospital in Limpopo, where they did a lot of x-rays, and they went, no, you're all right, no broken bones. And I then said, I've actually got a blood condition, and it's genetic, and my blood clots quickly. So I was a bit worried about them just sending me away. And when they heard me mention the blood condition, they went, oh, we'll have to send you to a private centre. So I said, well, that's fine because I'm covered by my insurance.
Yeah.
So they said, well, the nearest place we can send you is 2 hours away by ambulance. I really basically came around the next morning with my arm very, very bandaged, my neck in a collar. And when the doctor came to see me, he said my wrist had been smashed. He described it as being like a hammer to a windscreen. He said it was completely shattered.
Goodness.
So they'd had to put a plate and pins in. He said the clavicle was also smashed, but he didn't have a plate that he could put in there that day. So he said he would have to wait till the Monday. He thought he could get one from Switzerland. And he did, actually. He did succeed in getting one, but then when they opened it up to do the operation, they discovered that all the tendons had also been trashed, and these things clip into a tendon. So they couldn't use the plate, and they had to take the bone out in the middle that was all smashed. Left me with a bit there, and I have a hole in the middle there.
Oh, right.
Anyway, so I really wasn't very well after all this. I wasn't breathing well, I was struggling with it all, and they sent somebody to see me to do with my lungs, and then they told me that, they did send me for some x-rays, and they told me that I had something called atelectasis, which means basically that my lungs had gone down during the operation. And so I wasn't getting enough oxygen, part of them had died off. So I was on oxygen as well through that. Then I was complaining about the amount of pain in my back, and they said, well, you've broken 5 ribs that we can see. So at that particular stage, and in fact all the time I was in South Africa, that was all I knew. It was the wrist, the 5 ribs, the lung problem, which was what was preventing me from coming home. So I was in hospital for 3 weeks in South Africa. The last week of that, not strictly in a hospital bed, I had to stay in accommodation, which was like a hotel, but opposite where the hospital facilities were, so that I could go back in and just see the doctor. Right. And I needed to have lung tests to actually be able to come home again.
Right.
We got to September, October time, and obviously I realised I wasn't going to be able to bowl anymore. In actual fact, I couldn't move my arms, either arm past there at that point in time. But I had just got on the physio list, and they saw me immediately. And some of the physio that I had to do was using water in a pool. I still couldn't use my arms very well, but eventually I learnt I couldn't swim on my front anymore either. because you arch your back, and the arch is exactly where my fracture was.
Right.
So I had to learn to lay on my back and just use a sculling movement. I joined the Nuffield, and they've got a very short pool, and I just used to scull up and down. It took quite a few months till I was actually able to move my arms, but once I'd got into all the physio stuff that they'd given me to do, I actually, for the first time in my life, started doing backstroke, and I haven't swum on my front ever since. I've actually completely gone over to backstroke. My back does get very stiff. I did start back at bowls slightly before the Christmas, just gently trying to see how I would manage practicing. And I did a couple of sections because it wasn't in my bad hand, but because your neck's affected with everything, it does actually become very hard to bowl. And the hand had only just, this arm as well, had only just started moving. This was terribly bruised after the accident. So got back to it, but I was having so much problem with this wrist that the hospital decided that I needed to have the plate and the pins out. They'd x-rayed it again, and the pins, if they'd been put in the right place in the first place, had moved. We never knew what was the scenario there. So, but they'd moved and they were tapping the tendons and the nerves. So that was what, and my hand was actually, it was like completely like that. No, my fingers were not straight. I could not straighten my fingers. So, I spent every day pulling my fingers back to be able to straighten them up, and I've managed to get them back to that. This is the only one that's slightly crooked now. So I worked very hard. I finally finished the physio February or March time the following year. When I was in the wheelchair in the first instance, I never knew if I was going to get back out of that again. And I had to make myself not fall into that. I've had this accident, I've got a fractured spine. I'll just, sit back and let the world go by. But I'm not going to do that.